So Reverend Ryan and I could see it working on some of you. Yes, he was playing from the punk rock grunge band 9 Inch Nails that later became a cover by Johnny Cash. Yes, Johnny Cash covered the punk rock band 9 Inch Nails. And Ryan Steitz isn't sure which one is better. We'll post both of them. How about that? Can we post both of them this afternoon on the church's Facebook page? Because some of you are going to resonate with the 9 Inch Nails, some of you with Johnny Cash, and some of you are just going to have to meet in the middle. So as we enter into this next week of our CrossWords, the word for the week, as everyone has said, is disappointment. Disappointment. I want to start by taking us back 5 weeks. I'm wondering if anybody remembers what I preached on the last Sunday of January. You were at 8:30, cheater. Yes, disappointment. I almost changed this one, but then I realized 2 things. One, these are very different kinds of disappointment. And second, disappointment is a very serious, complicated topic worthy of 2 sermons. In January, our focus was on being disappointed in and by and with church. It was the 4th of 5 building blocks about expectations, the building blocks of our life together. You could expect to be welcomed, cared for, challenged, and right before we got to grow was disappointed. I said the church will disappoint you. And I shared with you through my tears my own disappointments with Big C Church and Little C Church and church people and church pastors. And I even, in my disappointment, said some days I wanted to toss my stole down, and kind of in a spur of the moment, I took it off and I tossed it on the blocks. And as you may remember, if you were here during our passing of the peacetime, sweet Ellie Beth came up, picked up that stole, handed it to me, kissed me square on the face, and right then and there, I couldn't hardly do the benediction because I thought, Lord Almighty, that's church. There it is, right there. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Fast forward to last week's sermon about vulnerability. We attempted to open up our hearts to the very essence of our natures. And I challenged us with the words of Dr. Brene Brown about how the culture is constantly numbing our vulnerability, and how through the example of Jesus we are challenged to be countercultural and not numb ourselves to our vulnerable side. And of course, anytime we open up our hearts to other people, what is likely to happen? We're likely to be disappointed. And as I said 5 weeks ago, anytime you put your faith and your hope and your whole heart into something in a real and honest way, chances are pretty high you're going to get disappointed. And most of us work so hard not to be disappointed. And some of us work even harder not to disappoint others. So much so that many of us end up trying so hard not to disappoint others that we give pieces of ourselves away, and try to work so hard to avoid disappointment. And we do it in a variety of ways. Some of us try to be perfect, or we perfect all the situations that we find ourselves in so that we won't disappoint someone. If I can just make it just perfect, they won't be disappointed and I won't be disappointed in me. Others of us don't make decisions at all. We so don't want to disappoint anyone, we just don't decide. You may know, a very silly example is, I ask Amy, where you want to go for dinner? You want to go to pizza or you want to go Chinese? And she knows that Chinese is my favorite. And she so wants pizza, but she doesn't want to disappoint me. And so she says, whatever, you decide. Amy doesn't really do that. Others of us don't want to disappoint others. And so we work really hard to be whatever you need us to be. If you need us to be blonde, we'll make an appointment at the salon. If you need us to be happy, even when we're sad, we'll buck up and put on a smile. We'll be whoever we need you. We'll be whoever you need us to be. So we won't disappoint you, and you won't reject us. And in trying to make sure we don't experience disappointment or cause disappointment for others, we get further and further away from our soul selves. Heck, some people can't even be in real relationships because they're so afraid of putting themselves out there in a real and honest way that they might get disappointed, that they can't trust or open themselves up, and so they build these big, high walls. Some of you got big, high walls. To protect ourselves so it doesn't happen. We want so desperately to avoid disappointment. And our Lenten prophet guiding us through this Lenten season, David White, reminds us that the measure of our courage is the measure of our willingness to embrace disappointment, to turn toward it rather than away. Now, if you don't believe in the words of a poet, maybe you believe the words of a scientist. Some time ago, a friend of mine gave me this book, The Soul of Shame, by Dr. Kurt Thompson. And he's a doctor, like a medical doctor, and he does stuff that I don't even understand because it says he works on the intersection between interpersonal neurobiology. I have no idea what that means. And Christian spiritual formation. He's a psychiatrist, but he's a researcher. And so he has figured out in ways I don't understand how to quantify this. And he says, when we turn toward what we are most terrified of, that's where the healing can happen. Whew. I don't want to do that, thank you very much, Dr. Thompson. Well, then he goes on to write a script for us, like a prescription kind of script. One of my favorite lines in The Soul of Shame says, life is not about not being messy. That's kind of messy, wasn't it? I'll read it again. Life is not about not being messy, but about being creative with the messes we have. I already posted it to our Facebook page, both mine and the church's, because I had like 10 people after 8:30 ask me for that quote. He reminds us that ruptures in our lives will occur, but resilience and life is to be found in how we repair them. Life is messy. And in the margin of the book where that line is, I wrote in a hot pink pen, roar, as in Father Roar, one of my faves. Because Father Roar, one of my favorite teachings, well, maybe it's not my favorite teaching, but it's most impactful teaching of my life from Father Roar, is if we do not transform our pain, we will surely transmit it. Woo! If we do not transform our pain, we will surely transmit it. He talks about if we don't work through our stuff, all that brokenness and pain and disappointment and shame begins to pile up, and that is what we need the love of God to save us from. Our own inability or unwillingness to transform our stuff. And it seems like that's a little bit of what we're doing during this Lenten season. We are turning towards the painful stuff, these crosswords, these words that are really difficult for many of us. Vulnerability, disappointment. Ooh, we're going to do anger next week, y'all. Regret. And we're taking that and we are turning towards that and hanging it on the cross with the prayer, the Lenten prayer, that we're taking our mess and being creative with it, and through the example of Jesus, as I've said every week, hanging it on the cross with the prayer that through the example of Jesus and the love of God, we might know healing and life. And Ryan and I on Monday took all the strips and lit a candle and had a moment of prayerfulness. And as we tied them together in prayer, it was overwhelming to read the powerful stuff that you are offering up to God with the hopes that love of God might actually transform something in you and offer some healing, turning towards the old rugged cross and hanging our stuff, hopeful for new life. You know, Dr. Thompson's extensive research teaches one really important thing. He says that the thing that saves us most from shame and disappointment is our connection with other people. He tells the story of a high-achieving school district which prided itself in the number of gifted and talented programs it offered in its elementary and middle school, and the extensive number of AP classes that it offered at its high schools. And one of the alumni who had previously graduated went off to college, and he came back to teach at his local high school. And he said, I want my students to have a different experience than what I had. People said, well, what do you mean? And he said, the school had become a factory of worry. That's his word. That was true when he was there, and even more so now that he was on the faculty. A factory of worry, constant fear of disappointment. Teachers afraid of disappointing their students and administration. Kids stressed to the max with the overwhelming pressures, not wanting to disappoint their parents or their teachers or their community. And it was smothering to everyone. And so this young teacher, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, decided he would open up his self, and I forget if he did it after school or on a Saturday, I don't remember. But he offered these kids a place to come, a safe space where he promised to listen without judgment. And after a few weeks, the kids began to tell about the stress they felt and the pressures they were under. He had created a safe space for them to share their worry and their disappointments. What happens when you get disappointment and you feel shame? What do? You isolate yourself from other people. You think, oh, I'm the only one who possibly could feel this way. But when these kids discovered they suddenly had a safe space to be honest and vulnerable about their disappointments and their fears, they realized they were not alone. It was in their connectedness that they found hope and life and healing. And that's what we're doing during Lent. Each week, saying, I got stories in my life that are no longer serving me. They are holding me back from who God is calling me to be. I got vulnerability that I'm afraid of. I got it shoved in a closet door. Somebody said to me this week, my closet is overflowing. Whew. Somebody listened during the sermon. That scares you. And together we're taking the messiness, the hurtfulness, the pain of our lives, and we're offering them into the safe space of our community. And we're tying them one to another, connecting our common brokenness and hurts and pains. And this week, our disappointments. And we're saying, I'm scared. And I know there are others who are scared too, and I'm disappointed, and I'm afraid of disappointing others, and I'm not alone in that. And maybe we're trying to turn toward the cross, turn toward our pain, and be more creative with how we heal and repair the brokenness of our hearts. And maybe by turning towards that and attempting to transform that, attempting to acknowledge the brokenness of our hearts, we might transmit a little less of it out into the world. And in opening up our hearts to allowing God's healing love to take all that stuff, and maybe by Easter, maybe over this process, it might save us just a little from ourselves. May it be so. May it be so for us. Amen.